Okay, it's the great and glorious, soon to be famous one day Nick Dutch here, yet again. And it's rather strange that I'm actually replying to noelplum99's video, which is entitled Open Challenge to All Theists, Can You Disprove God? Because my point of view, the way that I live and the way that I do what might be considered to be practices of a religious nature, does not fall into the easy to define boxes of theist or atheist, and certainly doesn't go into agnostic. If there is no proof of something, does not mean to say that I am either sure or unsure that that thing exists. There is also a difference between views or viewpoints and beliefs. So we've got to take that into account as well. I could have a viewpoint that the national minimum wage in the United Kingdom is a good idea. However, that would not necessarily be a belief, because I could do some sociological studies and I could see that more people who are in work have a slightly better standard of living than in the days when they were being paid £2 or £3 an hour. I was at one point being paid £3.50 an hour when I was a little younger. So essentially I know what life can be like if you're scraping away at a sub-national minimum wage level. But your question was, can you disprove God? To try and disprove God, I would have to define what I mean by God. I mean, you mentioned in your video the idea of God doing the Big Bang, creating the universe, and then sitting back on his fat ass and doing nothing after that. I understand that that's called deism. That's not necessarily called theism. Theism is much more to do with continually believing in the presence and existence of God. I personally do not feel that when I do theological exercises and I experience something which appears to be the feeling of the presence of God himself, that is proof of the existence of God. That is proof of the existence of an experience that I've had under some circumstances, which is dramatically different from me turning around to you and saying, oh, God does exist, he really does, which would be extreme and unnecessary. I go into, in more precise detail, what my point of view is in the article in the sidebar, which is very short, so even the occasional YouTuber who's got a short attention span should not find it too difficult. But going back to your question, could I disprove God? In order to do that, I would have to state what I mean by God. I could not go back to biblical text as my source of definition for God, because biblical text is self-contradictory, and there couldn't be a single thing which I could look up in the Bible, New Testament, Old Testament, Quran, Bhagavad Gita, or any of the others, which would be sufficient evidence of anything, because there would often be, at a later stage or at an earlier stage in the same books, evidence to the contrary to what I had stated. Also, if I was a theist and I made a statement of belief in, let's say, for example, God, would the person who was viewing the video about my apparent belief in God take that in the right context as a belief and not a statement of facts? I can have something called knowledge of God, which is a religious experience. The word knowledge in religious terms means a feeling of unity with God. I have had this. I can generate it. I can make it happen. Therefore, a religious person would say that they knew God. I'm not saying that. A religious person could say they know, in a religious sense, that God exists. I'm not saying that. Then there's the idea of knowledge in a scientific sense. And this is where there's a lot of confusion. Because when a religious person says that they have knowledge, it is then strawmanned to mean that the religious person is stating that they have knowledge in a scientific sense. Whereas if the religious person was genuinely wise about the meanings of words and the way they're used in their religion, they would not and could not make that assertion. The type of religious person who confuses religious definitions with scientific definitions is not worthy to be involved in a debate about theological matters, in my humble opinion. So could I disprove God? From my point of view, I can't prove God or disprove God. But I can state that I have a certain experience under some circumstances, which by religious definitions would be regarded as knowledge, but would not be regarded as knowledge in scientific terms. Hope that helps.